Security. We have a vagrant situation. Get this woman out of here before she disturbs our real guests. Vanessa Price, 35, the front desk manager, stood blocking the path to the elevators. The light from the crystal chandelier poured down, making her eyes look even colder, as if even the light wanted to keep its distance. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, one hand pointing directly at the woman in a charcoal-tailored suit, clutching a black leather briefcase against her body. Alicia Morgan, 39, didn't move. Her dark eyes slowly swept across Vanessa's face, her gaze so calm it was almost unsettling. The space around them seemed to slow. A group of white guests in tennis outfits and summer dresses began forming a half circle. Phones were raised, cameras already recording. In their eyes was anticipation, the hope for a Karen moment to post on TikTok. Vanessa glanced toward the growing audience, her voice enunciating each word as if she were performing for the crowd. People like this think that just because they wear expensive clothes, they can step into our world. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. An older man nodded approvingly. Good for you, dear. Standards matter. Vanessa smirked, adding, security will escort her out the back door, where she belongs. From behind a marble column, 2 security guards appeared. Carlos Ramirez, 41, thick-necked and broad-shouldered, put a hand on his radio. Ethan Wallace, 39, silent but blocking Alicia's right side, stood firm. Carlos reported into the radio, his voice flat. Code yellow. Main lobby. Suspicious individual. Possible unauthorized entry. Alicia glanced down at the platinum face of her Cartier watch, catching the chandelier's light. In 10 minutes, I have a meeting upstairs, she said evenly, without urgency. Vanessa let out a sharp, deliberate laugh, making sure it carried across the lobby. The only appointment you have is with the sidewalk outside. At the concierge desk, Sophie Nguyen, 27, was live-streaming on her phone, whispering into her mic. You're watching a hotel manager kick out a black businesswoman for no reason. Viewers jumped from 847 to 1,200, then 2,800. Spotting the camera, Vanessa polished the narrative. Everyone, this is what happens when some people think fake designer clothes will get them into classy places. The crowd murmured in agreement. Sophie rolled her eyes, muttering into the live stream. This is actual insanity. Alicia's grip tightened slightly on the briefcase, a platinum keycard flashing briefly from inside. No one but her noticed. Her phone buzzed. A text. Legal team ready for acquisition announcement. Boardroom prepared. Vanessa squinted, trying to read the screen, then sneered. Probably a message from her parole officer. More phones were raised. TikTok captions began to appear. Karen manager versus entitled woman. Carlos stepped closer. Ma'am, please leave voluntarily, or we will escort you out. Alicia tilted her head slightly, her voice almost a whisper. I understand your confusion, but I suggest you check my appointment before making an irreversible mistake. Vanessa shot back with a mocking laugh. Irreversible. The only thing irreversible here is the damage to this hotel's reputation if we let people like you wander in freely. Viewers surged to 8,000. At the bar, Daniel Brooks, 43, a travel blogger, typed rapidly on his tablet. Discrimination in real time. Grand Meridian's shameful display. His post was already spreading through hospitality industry forums. Alicia checked her watch again. 8 minutes. Carlos frowned. 8 minutes to what? Your meeting with the Tooth Fairy? The crowd chuckled softly. Phones rose higher. Sophie spoke into the live stream, her voice tight. She told them to check her information, and they're just ignoring her. The sound of typing continued. Phone notifications chimed in the tense air. And at the center of that ring, Alicia Morgan stood like a stone statue, her eyes locked on Vanessa. She knew exactly how this game would end, but letting it play out would make the ending hit a lot harder. The hum of the air conditioning blew steadily, icy cold. Yet in the marble lobby, the temperature seemed to be rising by the second. The crowd pressed in closer, the murmur of conversation mixing with the steady ping of live stream notifications. Sophie Nguyen moved her camera in close to Alicia's face, whispering for the more than 10,000 viewers watching, "Do you see this? She's still standing there, not a trace of fear. Can someone explain to me how she can be this calm?" Vanessa Price rolled her eyes, then turned to perform for the audience. "I've worked in luxury hospitality for 12 years. I can tell instantly who doesn't belong here. This is clearly some kind of scam or a sob story." A few O's of agreement came from guests holding martinis in the far corner. Alicia slowly opened her briefcase, just enough for Vanessa to glimpse several documents with bold, all-caps titles in black ink. Morgan Hospitality Group. Another bore a legal seal and notarized signature. But before Vanessa could read further, Alicia closed the case again, gently, like shutting a locked door. 7 minutes, Alicia said, her eyes never leaving Vanessa. Carlos Ramirez glanced at his colleague, speaking low, but loud enough for Sophie's live stream mic to catch. "We really need to do something. Before the press shows up," Ethan Wallace cut in. "Follow procedure. No exceptions." A ding echoed from the far elevator. The doors opened, but no one stepped out. Instead, the sound of brisk footsteps came from the VIP corridor. Richard Ellison appeared. 50. 6 years old, silver hair neatly combed, his navy suit pressed to perfection. He took in the scene with a glance, the faint scent of expensive cologne trailing behind him. "What's going on here?" His voice was deep, carrying the authority of 15 years managing luxury hotels. Vanessa stepped forward as if she had found an ally. "Richard, thank God you're here." She's refusing to leave, claims to have an appointment, but there's nothing in the system. I've been protecting this hotel's standards for 10 minutes. Richard's eyes swept over Alicia, noting the suit, the Cartier watch, the Louboutin heels. He saw beauty, expense, but still thought just surface. "Ma'am, I'm Richard Ellison, the general manager here. I understand there's some confusion about hotel policy, but this is a private property. We have the right to refuse service." Sophie's live stream viewership spiked. 15,000, 17,800, 20,000. Comments flew past. "This is obvious discrimination." "Careful, she looks like she knows exactly what she's doing." Alicia glanced at her watch. 7 minutes. Richard raised an eyebrow. 7 minutes until what? You disappear? The crowd chuckled. A woman in a pearl necklace called out, "Finally, someone enforcing the rules." Richard nodded to Carlos. "Document the situation. If she doesn't leave immediately, call the police. Carlos lifted his radio. Dispatch requesting units to Grand Meridian. Possible trespassing, passing or media presence on site. Outside, sirens wailed. The first news vans pulled up to the glass doors. The revolving door spun non-stop as reporters poured in. Vanessa straightened, her face glowing as if she were center stage at Broadway. Police are here. This show is over. Richard stepped closer to Alicia, his voice lower but heavy with pressure. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's about to end. Trust me, I've seen every type of person. The chandelier light caught Alicia's face, and in that instant, Sophie and tens of thousands watching saw the faint curl of a smile at the corner of her lips. The smile of someone who already held the winning hand. You think you've seen every type of person, Richard? Alicia's voice was soft, but sharp as a blade. Then let's see how you handle the kind of person you can't fire. The air in the lobby seemed to drop into a sudden stillness. Some in the crowd lowered their phones, as if they had just heard a prophecy. The marble lobby now felt like a vast theatre. Light from the crystal chandeliers above reflected off the phone screens of dozens of spectators filming from every angle. The air was thick with curiosity, judgment, and a faint sense of anticipation for something out of the ordinary. Richard Ellison stood less than a meter from Alicia Morgan. He leaned forward slightly, his voice deep with a trace of mockery. Someone I can't fire. That's interesting. But this is private property, and I can fire anyone who disrupts the standards here. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vanessa Price stood at his side, smirking, fanning the flames. Richard, don't let her stall. People like this, the longer you wait, the messier it gets. Alicia turned her gaze to Vanessa, her eyes as calm as still water, yet beneath them a storm was forming. Trouble is what happens when action is taken without verification. She paused deliberately, letting the words settle into the air. I've asked for only one thing. Confirm my appointment. Vanessa waved her hand dismissively. Not in the system means it doesn't exist. It's that simple. Carlos Ramirez and Ethan Wallace stepped half a pace closer, their cross formation complete. No orders were needed, only the look in their eyes and the placement of their hands resting on their belts, right where their tasers were holstered. Sophie Nguyen, still live streaming, tilted her camera and whispered to the more than 27,000 viewers now watching. They're about to throw her out, but something's off. She's not afraid at all. Comments poured in like a flood. Careful, this is a plot twist. Look at the way she's standing. That's not how someone defeated stands. Richard glanced down at his watch. You've wasted 15 minutes of my time. The police will be here in 3 minutes. Alicia looked at her Cartier watch. 5 minutes. Her voice was steady, like delivering a financial report. Not loud, not soft, but something in her tone made Richard's brow tighten slightly. At the bar, blogger Daniel Brooks typed another line into the article now spreading rapidly through hospitality forums. This level of absolute confidence, it's either madness or true power. A ripple moved through the lobby as new guests arriving were drawn toward the center of the unfolding drama. An elderly woman wearing a pearl necklace whispered to her husband, "This woman, she looks familiar." Vanessa cut in sharply. No one's familiar with a troublemaker. Richard turned to Carlos. Prepare a trespassing charge. Clause 214 in the property rules. Any individual who refuses to leave when asked is considered trespassing. Alicia tilted her head slightly. Clause 2:14, interesting. But you're ignoring Clause 1:1, the right of a lawful owner to access the property at any time. Richard froze for half a second. Vanessa frowned, not understanding. Carlos and Ethan exchanged a glance. This wasn't the kind of answer you'd hear from someone who didn't belong here. Outside the glass doors, red and blue police lights flashed. News cameras pressed against the entrance. The air inside was taut like a violin string, waiting for a single cut to snap it. Alicia drew a slow breath and stepped half a pace forward. No one stopped her, but every eye locked onto her smallest movement. I'll ask again, Richard. Her voice was low but carried clearly. Are you certain you want to keep going in this direction? Richard laughed, the sound thick with confidence. Absolutely certain. And you should know, here, I'm the one who decides. The words, I'm the one who decides, echoed in the air like a stamp of authority, though Richard had no idea they were about to become the opening line of his own downfall. The revolving doors of the Grand Meridian gave a faint squeal as two police officers stepped inside. The red and blue lights from the patrol car outside swept across the ceiling, streaking the perfect marble lobby like urgent brushstrokes on a flawless painting. The crowd parted to either side, forming a narrow path that led straight to where Alicia Morgan was standing. The crackle of a radio came from Carlos Ramirez's shoulder. Unit 47, on site. Reports indicate heavy media presence. Proceed. Tomwu protocol to avoid litigation. Vanessa Price seized the moment, her voice louder than necessary. Officers, this is the disruptive individual. She has refused to leave, is not in the booking system or on any appointment list. One of the officers, Sergeant Miller, tilted his head, his steel blue eyes scanning Alicia from head to toe. Beside him, Officer Jenkins tightened his grip on his belt, where his firearm rested, ready to be drawn if needed. Richard Ellison stepped forward half a pace, his voice firm and absolute. We wish to file a formal complaint for criminal trespass under Tennessee, Code 39, 14,405. Please proceed. Alicia remained still, her gaze so steady that a few in the crowd began to feel uneasy. She spoke slowly, as if reading a critical clause from a contract. Section 39, 405 is clear. Trespass applies only to individuals without lawful rights to the property. The question is, who here is willing to state that I have no lawful rights? Vanessa let out a sharp laugh, glancing at Richard for confirmation. We've checked. There is no Alicia Morgan in the system. That's all that matters. Alicia exhaled softly. Then, before dozens of cameras, set her black leather briefcase on the front desk. The movement was deliberate, slow, as if she were unsealing a timed explosive. The rasp of the zipper echoed sharply in the tense silence. Zip. A thick sheet of cream paper slid out under her hand. At the top, embossed in gold, was the logo of Morgan Hospitality Group. Beneath it, in bold print, Controlling Interest Acquisition, Grand Meridian Hotels International. Richard glanced at it, ready to scoff, but the moment his eyes caught the raised seal and the string of board signatures, his smile froze. Vanessa leaned closer to read aloud, though her voice began to shake. Effective August 9, 2025, Morgan Hospitality Group holds a 73% controlling interest. Her words choked off. Carlos, who had been resting his hand on his handcuffs, drew back as if he'd touched hot metal. Alicia lifted her head, her gaze sweeping over them all. I am Alicia Morgan, CEO of Morgan Hospitality Group. As of 9 a.m. this morning, my company owns this hotel. Gasps rippled through the lobby like a sudden electric shock. Sophie Nguyen nearly dropped her phone. Oh my God, she's the owner. Sophie's voice rang out on the live stream, sending viewership skyrocketing from 38,000 to 5,000 in under a minute. Richard stepped back, his eyes still locked on the seal, one he could not dispute. No, that's impossible. I haven't been notified. Alicia flipped to another page. The board meeting agenda, its very first line reading, Board meeting, 3:00 p.m. Today, Penthouse Boardroom. That's the appointment I mentioned several times, but instead of verifying, you chose to humiliate me. The final words landed like a verdict. Cameras swung rapidly, capturing the sweat beading on Richard's forehead and the drained color from Vanessa's face. Outside, the sirens still wailed, but inside the reveal had detonated, and those who had just held power were no longer on Richard's side. The clicks of cameras and the tapping of phone keyboards blended into a chaotic soundtrack. Yet in the marble lobby, every sound seemed to be drawn into the space between Alicia Morgan and those who had just tried to throw her out of her own property. Richard Ellison stared at the documents on the reception desk, his lips trembling. Impossible. The board had to notify me. Alicia leaned forward slightly, her voice even but sharp as a surgeon's blade. The notification was sent. Today's meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. in the Penthouse Boardroom. I arrived on time. Only difference is I came through the lobby before you had the chance to stage your little display of protecting your so-called standards. She drew out a thick blue-bound legal file and opened it for the cameras. The first page read in bold, Due Diligence Report, Grand Meridian Hotels. Our acquisition due diligence was interesting. 2018, an internal settlement for sexual harassment, buried. 2020, a discrimination complaint, also buried. And today, she swept her hand toward the crowd now live streaming. Witnessed live by 71,000 people. A murmur swelled among the onlookers, like a wave crashing against stone. Vanessa Price stepped forward half a pace, her voice shrill. This is a setup! You came here just to get me and Richard fired! Alicia turned to her, the corners of her mouth lifting into a smile that was almost pitying. I came here to attend my own meeting. Whether you lose your job is the result of your actions, not my presence. Carlos Ramirez and Ethan Wallace exchanged glances. Carlos lowered his hand from his radio, speaking softly but clearly enough for Sophie's live stream mic to catch. She's legit. Alicia nodded slightly. And because I have the right to invoke Clause 12.4 in the acquisition agreement, termination for cause, effective immediately, no severance, no benefits, no pension. Richard's face drained of color. Vanessa stepped back entirely. Guests who had earlier nodded in agreement now lowered their phones, avoiding her gaze. From the main entrance, Margaret Carter, board member, entered, flanked by 2 legal aides. She stopped at the sight before her, eyes flicking from the documents to Alicia's face. "Ms. Morgan, apologies for the delay. We've been waiting for you in the boardroom. What exactly is happening here?" Alicia never took her eyes off Richard and Vanessa. "What's happening is the general manager and front desk manager of this hotel decided that my appearance was reason enough to block me at the door. They called security, called the police, and put their bias on full display for the press." Margaret turned to Richard. "Derek, no. Richard, tell me this isn't what I'm seeing." Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Vanessa moved to speak, but Alicia raised her hand, stopping her instantly. "No excuses needed. Everything has been recorded by at least 90,000 people, along with the hotel's own security cameras." Sophie raised her phone higher, her voice brimming with excitement. 91,000 and climbing." Alicia drew in a deep breath, then delivered the line that seemed to pull the air from the entire lobby. "And as of this moment, Richard Ellison and Vanessa Price are no longer employees of the Grand Meridian." Camera shutters clicked, cheers broke out, and gasps filled the air. The 2 security guards who had originally flanked Alicia now stepped toward Richard and Vanessa, ready to escort them out of the building. This unmasking was no longer just a private confrontation between a few individuals. It had become a defining moment in the history of the hospitality industry, where real power did not lie in a tailored suit or a nameplate, but in ownership and in the truth that could not be hidden. The revolving doors of the Grand Meridian had barely closed before a wave of reporters flooded in, microphones and cameras raised like a wall of steel. Flashes exploded, reflecting off the white marble floor, sending dazzling bursts of light across the lobby like a Broadway stage. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, mingled with the heat of overworked equipment. Alicia Morgan stood at the center, the reception desk behind her still bearing witness to the hotel's spectacularly failed ejection. In front of her, Richard Ellison and Vanessa Price were flanked by 2 security guards, not to protect them, but to escort them out. A reporter from NBC shouted over the crowd, "Ms. Morgan, how do you feel about being stopped at the front door of your own hotel?" Alicia didn't answer immediately. She turned halfway, ensuring every camera had a clear angle. Light from the chandelier caught her face, highlighting the deep, dark eyes, calm yet utterly uncompromising. "How do I feel? I see an opportunity." The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Reporters glanced at one another, pens hovering mid-air. An opportunity for the entire world to see this. When prejudice takes the lead, truth gets pushed aside. And when power rests in the right hands, everything changes immediately. Margaret Carter stepped forward from behind her, nodding in confirmation. "The board has verified Ms. Morgan's ownership. The reform begins this moment." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. A CNN reporter pushed forward. "What kind of reform, Ms. Morgan?" Alicia opened her leather case and pulled out a thick document, the cover stamped boldly with the words, "Hospitality First Protocol." She placed it on the reception desk for every camera to capture. "Starting today, the Grand Meridian will operate under a customer-first, zero-tolerance for bias policy. Every employee, from the highest to the lowest level, must undergo anti-bias screening and training within 60 days. Anyone who fails to complete it will have their contract terminated." She paused, scanning the crowd of reporters, then turned her gaze directly on Richard and Vanessa. "And if discriminatory conduct occurs, even once, Clause 12.4 will be enforced. No warnings, no severance." An Associated Press reporter called out, "But Ms. Morgan, admitting this also means accepting legal liability, doesn't it?" Alicia's smile was cold. "We accept responsibility. That's the difference between a company that only knows how to defend itself and a company that knows how to lead." The sound of keyboards clicking and cameras snapping filled the air. Sophie Nguyen, still live streaming, tilted her phone to frame Alicia, surrounded by the media. Viewers climbed, 98,000, 103,000, then 110,000. Carlos Ramirez and Ethan Wallace stood silently nearby, their expressions a mix of shame and relief. They knew they had just avoided the termination list, thanks to the second chance policy Alicia had hinted at when she first entered the lobby. Alicia leaned slightly toward them, her voice low enough for Sophie's mic to catch. "Next time, verify before you give orders." Then she turned back, looking directly into the lens. "I don't just own this hotel. I'm going to make it the industry standard. And today is day one." The cheers, murmurs, and rapid-fire camera clicks echoed up into the towering ceiling. This moment was not just breaking news. It was an image destined to be replayed millions of times, in thousands of broadcasts, for years to come. The elevator doors opened to the top floor of the Grand Meridian, revealing the penthouse boardroom stretched out with floor. 2. Ceiling glass walls framing a panoramic view of the city. Afternoon light streamed in, sweeping across the long walnut table where 7 members of the board were already seated. The air was heavy, not because of the altitude, but because of the weight of what had just unfolded in the lobby below. Alicia Morgan entered, followed by Margaret Carter and her 2 attorneys. In Alicia's hand was the same leather briefcase that had, in mere hours, become a greater symbol of power than any nameplate or golden key. Margaret motioned for Alicia to take the chair at the head of the table, the chair's seat, every gaze fixed on her, a mix of curiosity and caution. Alicia set the briefcase down and unlocked it with a sharp click, the sound like the gavel that begins a trial. Before we discuss the details of the acquisition, we need to address an urgent matter, an incident that has just caused both financial loss and reputational damage to this entire institution. She tapped the remote, and the large screen at the end of the room came to life, playing Sophie Nguyen's live stream. Richard and Vanessa blocking Alicia, security closing in, their mocking words echoing crystal clear. In the top corner of the screen, the number of live viewers at its peak, 97,482. Several board members frowned. James Patterson, known for his conservative stance, spoke up. "Ms. Morgan, we agree the incident was not a good look, but is it necessary to expose all of this to the press? This could have been handled internally," Alicia cut in, her voice cold yet steady, never needing to rise. "Mr. Patterson, 97,000 people have already seen it. Handling it internally is no longer an option. Moreover," she flipped open a financial report. "Within just 30 minutes of this going viral, Grand Meridian stock dropped 4.7%, wiping out $42 million in market value." A wave of silence moved around the table. Susan Kim leaned forward slightly. "Then what's your proposal?" Alicia lifted a blue-covered document. Section 12.4 Termination for cause. Richard Ellison, General Manager, and Vanessa Price, Front Office Manager, terminated immediately. No severance, no pension benefits. This is not personal discipline. This is a message to the entire industry. Margaret nodded in agreement. This falls within the rights of the controlling shareholder. I support it. Robert Hayes, a 12-year board veteran, asked slowly, "Legal costs?" Alicia's attorney, David Rodriguez, answered crisply, "None." Section 12.4 fully waives all financial liability in cases of proven discriminatory conduct. Nods circled the table. No one opposed. Margaret entered it into the record. Termination resolution passed unanimously. Alicia did not smile. She rose, stepping in front of the screen, her voice cutting through the room like a laser. I did not buy the Grand Meridian to preserve a system that hides misconduct. I bought it to dismantle what does not deserve to exist and rebuild from the ground up. The Hospitality First policy will be applied across the entire system within 90 days. All managers must be certified in bias, prevention training from a recognized organization. All guest complaints will go directly to the Internal Compliance Department, bypassing local management. Susan Kim typed quickly on her tablet, then looked up. You're turning this scandal into a reform campaign. Alicia met her gaze. No, I'm turning it into the new standard. The deep golden light of late afternoon flooded the room, casting Alicia's shadow across the glass wall. And in that moment, they all understood. The woman stopped in the lobby. That morning was not just the hotel's new owner. She was the storm that was about to redefine the entire industry. The elevator doors slid open, and Alicia Morgan stepped out with Margaret Carter and 2 attorneys, clutching a thick file like a final verdict. The chandelier light reflected off the marble floor, casting a glow across her calm, yet razor-sharp expression. Down in the lobby, the crowd of reporters had yet to disperse. Cameras swiveled in unison the moment they saw Alicia return. Shouts of questions erupted like a rapid-fire barrage. Ms. Morgan, what was the board's decision? What will happen to Richard Ellison and Vanessa Price? Do you intend to take them to court? Alicia stopped in the exact spot where she had been blocked just hours earlier. The sharp strike of her heels against the floor echoed like a drum roll. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice carried with authority. I will make this clear, so no one has to guess. She opened the file and pulled out 2 termination letters, each stamped in red with the words, Termination for cause. Section 12.4. Richard Ellison, General Manager. Vanessa Price, Front Office Manager. As the controlling shareholder of Grand Meridian Hotels, I order the immediate termination of your contracts, no severance, no pension benefits, no chance of return. Camera flashes erupted in a blinding flurry. A few audible gasps came from guests in the lobby. Carlos Ramirez and Ethan Wallace, the 2 security guards who had closed in on Alicia earlier, stood frozen, exchanging a glance heavy with the weight of what they had just witnessed. Richard's face was pale, his hand gripping the small box of personal belongings someone had already prepared for him. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but Alicia raised her hand to stop her. No explanation is needed. 97,000 people have already seen and heard enough. An NBC reporter pushed forward. "But isn't this an extreme action, Ms. Morgan? Aren't you concerned about the impact on your reputation?" Alicia turned fully toward the cameras, a faint smile on her lips. "Reputation is not protected by hiding wrongdoing. It is built with transparency and action." Margaret Carter spoke next, her voice like an official press release. "This decision takes effect immediately. Grand Meridian will implement the Hospitality First policy across the entire system." Alicia continued, lifting the remaining file. "In the next 90 days, every manager must complete a certified bias prevention training program from an accredited organization. All guest complaints will be sent directly to the Internal Compliance Department. No one will be allowed to bypass verification before taking action." In the crowd, Sophie Nguyen whispered into her live stream, "She just turned this scandal into a historic milestone. 115,000 people are watching right now." Alicia scanned the lobby, her gaze settling on the exact spot where she had been stopped that morning. Today, Grand Meridian starts over, and this time, no one will be denied the right to walk through these doors because of who they are. A few claps broke the silence, then spread until the entire lobby was filled with applause. Amid the cheers, Richard and Vanessa were escorted out, not as symbols of authority, but as fading silhouettes disappearing through the exit. At exactly 6:00 p.m., the Grand Meridian lobby glowed like a television studio. Dozens of LED lights formed an arc, reflecting off the polished white marble tiles. In front of the podium stood a brand new hotel logo with a freshly printed tagline beneath it. "Every guest belongs here." Alicia Morgan emerged from the hallway, dressed in a navy blue suit that was both powerful and refined. She carried no thick files as she had that morning, only a neatly folded press release, as if her entire speech had already been engraved in her mind. Dozens of lenses tracked her every step. The clicks of cameras blended with live stream updates announcing the number. 126,000 viewers watching live. She stopped, placed both hands on the podium, and swept her gaze across the room. Today, in this very lobby, a shameful incident occurred. Our staff, including members of management, blocked a guest who happened to be the controlling shareholder and new owner of Grand Meridian Hotels from entering the building. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Alicia raised her hand, cutting it short. "I will not avoid this. This was discrimination, and we take full responsibility." She paused, letting the weight of her words drop into the room like a stone before continuing. "As of today, the individuals directly responsible have been terminated under Section 12.4, Termination for Cause. No severance, no benefits, no exceptions." Cameras zoomed in on her face. There was not a flicker of hesitation. But firing a few people is not enough to change a system. That is why we are announcing the Hospitality First Protocol, the new standard for all 57 Grand Meridian hotels. All managers must complete certified bias, prevention training within 90 days. All guest complaints will be sent directly to the Internal Compliance Department. Verification before action is mandatory, without exception. Any violation will result in immediate termination. Reporters scribbled furiously. A Reuters journalist called out, "Are you not concerned that admitting fault will expose the company to more lawsuits?" Alicia tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "I'm more afraid of silence. Silence feeds discrimination. Transparency kills it." The answer drew a collective "oh" from the room. Sophie Nguyen, still live streaming, whispered to her audience, "She just turned the toughest question into her slogan." Alicia closed with a voice that was low, yet carried across the entire hall. "I cannot change the past of Grand Meridian, but I can secure its future, and that future begins now." Applause thundered through the lobby. On the live stream, the viewer count hit 131,000. The cameras still burned bright, but the story had shifted. No longer a scandal, but a manifesto for reform. That very night, the air around the Grand Meridian had yet to cool. Outside, satellite news vans lined the entire stretch of West End Avenue. Inside, the sound of reporters' keyboards clattered like rain on glass, every headline circling back to the same name: Alicia Morgan. On Twitter, the hashtag #HatHospitalityFirst shot straight to the national top 3 within just 45 minutes of the press conference. Clips cut from Sophie Nguyen's live stream, Alicia holding up section 12.4 or delivering the line, "Transparency kills discrimination," were shared tens of thousands of times. CNN aired a special segment. In an unprecedented move, the new CEO of Grand Meridian Hotels publicly fired 2 senior managers for discriminatory conduct and unveiled a plan to reform the entire system. Fox Business launched a roundtable discussion. Is transparency the new business strategy? MSNBC called Alicia the reform storm in the hospitality industry. Meanwhile, the Grand Meridian Reservations Department was flooded with emails and calls, not cancellations, but new bookings. A law firm in Chicago requested to host a conference at the hotel because of its transparent and decisive reform statement. A New York fashion label sent a message: "We're choosing Grand Meridian for our spring show. Your message aligns with our brand." Internal report at 2 a.m. New bookings up 31% compared to the same hour last week. Conference and event packages up 18% in just 6 hours, and 87% of all social media mentions were positive, an almost unheard of figure after a crisis. But not everyone approved. A hospitality industry lobby group claimed Alicia had embarrassed the entire industry and set a dangerous precedent, insisting that all disputes should be handled quietly. Alicia read the report and gave a faint smile. Quiet is the reason these things have gone on for decades. Meanwhile, Richard Ellison returned to his suburban apartment with a single cardboard box. The elevator doors closed slowly, reflecting the image of a man who had lost everything in less than 12 hours. Vanessa Price received an email from another hotel cancelling a scheduled interview. The reason stated, "We don't want to become the next Grand Meridian." As for Carlos Ramirez and Ethan Wallace, the 2 security guards who had once closed in on Alicia, they began a special training session at 8 a.m. the next morning. In front of Sophie's camera, Carlos said, "Yesterday, I was just following orders. Today, I understand I have to follow what's right." 4 days after the press conference, Alicia Morgan's office was flooded with invitations, emails, and partnership proposals. But what shocked the industry more than the surge in bookings was the domino effect sweeping across the hospitality sector. The 12 largest lodging corporations in the United States convened emergency meetings. The Wall Street Journal summarized it in one headline: "After Grand Meridian's surprise strike, competitors are forced to re-examine buyer's complaint handling and hiring policies." Hillmore International announced it would implement a company-wide bias audit. Regency Suites Group declared a partnership with the Civil Rights Federation to train senior management. Crown Line Hotels released a handbook titled Verify Before You Act, inspired directly by Alicia's own words. On Capitol Hill, a group of Tennessee state legislators introduced the Hotel Accountability Act, requiring all hotels with more than 50 rooms to publicly report any verified cases of discrimination. The bill explicitly cited the Grand Meridian case as proof of the power of transparency. Alicia was invited to testify before the Senate Commerce Services Committee. On the day of the hearing, she wore the same navy suit from the press conference and began her statement. The hospitality industry welcomes millions of people each year. If bias makes it through the door, it will stay in the system. Transparency is not just a PR strategy, it is the only insurance policy for reputation. The line was quoted on CNN, MSNBC, and printed in bold on the front page of USA Today. The American Hotel and Lodging Association, AHLA, later announced the Washington Standard, a mandatory set of anti-bias training and complaint, handling requirements named after Alicia's surname as an unofficial acknowledgement. Around the same time in Nashville, the first session of the Hospitality First training program was held right at the Grand Meridian. Carlos Ramirez and Ethan Wallace sat in the front row in their security uniforms, taking careful notes on every word from the instructor. Sophie and Gwen's live stream of the training drew over 250,000 live viewers. On Instagram, the hashtag #EveryGuestBelongs here exploded. Influencers shared stories of new positive experiences at the Grand Meridian, from a black family welcomed with a handwritten letter to a same-sex couple receiving an anniversary greeting from management. From the 20th floor balcony, Alicia looked down at the stream of guests coming and going through the lobby, now hung with a massive banner. Verify first, judge later for every guest. Margaret Carter stepped beside her and handed over the weekly report. Revenue up 23%, year over year. Bookings from minority customers up 34%. Average online review ratings climbing from 4.1 to 4.7 out of 5. Alicia smiled slightly, her voice low but certain. This is only the beginning. 6 months after the incident, the Grand Meridian had undergone a complete transformation. The lobby was no longer the site of a bitter confrontation, but had become a symbol of welcome. On the wall opposite the reception desk hung a large framed photograph of Alicia Morgan leaning down to speak with a young black girl at the press conference, with the words beneath it, "You belong everywhere, your dreams take you." Every new employee, from front desk and housekeeping to management, went through the Hospitality First program as a rite of passage. Phrases like, "Verify first, judge later," and "Every guest belongs here" had become instinctive, no longer just slogans. Annual revenue for the Grand Meridian rose by 27%, a figure once thought impossible for an industry struggling to recover from an economic downturn. More importantly, internal surveys showed that 94% of employees felt proud to work there, a sharp increase from 62% the previous year. At Harvard Business School, the story of the Grand Meridian overhaul became a required case study in the Business Ethics and Leadership course. The footage of the incident and Alicia's handling of it was dissected in detail, from communication strategy and crisis management to legal provisions like 12.4 Sui, termination for cause. In the industry, the Washington Standard had spread to 12 major hotel chains, impacting hundreds of thousands of employees. In every place it was implemented, reports showed a marked drop in bias complaints and a steady rise in service ratings. Richard Ellison disappeared from the industry without a single comment. Vanessa Price moved into online sales, her personal pages closing public comments. But Carlos Ramirez and Ethan Wallace, the security guards who once blocked Alicia, were now guest lecturers in anti-bias training programs. They stood before classes telling the story of the day we almost lost our careers and the lesson in having the courage to admit fault. One afternoon, Alicia walked through the lobby and saw Sophie Nguyen, now a documentary filmmaker, interviewing international guests about the new Grand Meridian experience. The camera panned quickly, catching Alicia's gaze into the lens, calm yet resolute. "Is this story the ending?" Sophie asked, half joking. Alicia answered simply, her voice carrying across the lobby. "No. This is a semicolon. The rest is how we keep every door open." Golden sunset light streamed through the tall glass, bathing the lobby in a warm glow. In the corner, a group of staff helped an elderly couple find their room, offering them hot tea to warm their hands. A simple gesture, yet it contained everything Alicia had fought to reclaim. The Grand Meridian had not just changed. It had left a legacy, that the right to be treated with respect is a standard, not a privilege, and once etched into the foundation, that standard would never be erased. In business, you can buy a building, you can buy a brand, you can even buy an entire advertising campaign. But you cannot buy respect. Respect only comes when those in positions of power have the courage to stand tall, look directly at long entrenched biases, and dismantle them. Alicia Morgan did more than save the reputation of a hotel. She rewrote the definition of world-class service, a place where every guest is welcomed with recognition, not suspicion. And you? Have you ever experienced a moment when you were judged solely by your appearance? Share your story in the comments, because change sometimes begins with a single account. If you believe dignity should come before profit, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next Dignity Check story. Because when dignity meets determination, no door remains closed.